What if I told you that speaking less could make you 10 times more attractive and influential than any modern communication technique? Seneca, the most powerful advisor in Rome, discovered that just 4 strategic words can trigger a chemical response in anyone's brain, creating an instant connection that transcends social, cultural, and even linguistic barriers. This secret was kept for centuries in the private letters of the Stoics. But today, neuroscience has confirmed it. These 4 words activate the same brain centers as love and deep trust. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment what part of the world you're watching from, because now I'm going to tell you everything. Tonight, you are not here by chance. You are here because your soul needs calm, because something within you desires rest. Not just the body, but also the mind. And the ancient sages, the Stoics, knew how to achieve this. During the coming hours, you will hear timeless lessons, words written by men who faced wars, losses, betrayals, and still found peace in the midst of chaos. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. They did not speak from theory, they spoke from the inner battle, and tonight their voices will become a whisper that will accompany you to sleep. You don't need to understand everything. You don't have to struggle to remember every phrase. Just listen and let their teachings cleanse your mind, like rain cleanses the dust of the world. This is not just another video, it is a refuge, a truce, a place where you can release the weight of the day and remember that even in darkness there is wisdom waiting to be heard. Have you ever experienced that at the end of the day, when you finally turn off the light and lie down, your body is tired, but your mind is still switched on? The thoughts begin to arrive. The worries, the pending tasks, what you said, what you didn't say, images from the past, fears of the future, and suddenly you are trapped in a mental storm, just when you most need to rest. Sleeping well has become a luxury, but it doesn't have to be this way. The Stoics more than 2,000 years ago already spoke about this. They knew that true rest does not begin on the pillow, but in the mind. They knew that insomnia often comes not from external noise, but from internal noise. This journey is a tour of 25 Stoic lessons designed to help you do exactly that. Silence the mental noise, release what you cannot control, and reconnect with the peace that already lives within you. These are not empty advice or pretty phrases. They are practical tools, small reminders that you can apply from this very night. Each lesson is a step towards a calmer mind, a more relaxed body, and deeper sleep. Here you will not find magic formulas. What you will find is timeless wisdom translated into simple actions. Breathing consciously, releasing expectations, being grateful for the present moment, accepting what is. The ancient Stoic philosophers understood something that modern science is only now confirming. The quality of our sleep is directly connected to the quality of our thoughts. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his personal diary, later known as Meditations, he was not writing for publication. He was writing for himself, creating a mental practice of examining his thoughts, his reactions, his judgments. These were exercises in mental hygiene, ways of clearing the mind of unnecessary clutter that would otherwise disturb his peace. Tonight, as you listen to these words, imagine that you are joining an ancient tradition of wisdom seekers who understood that the battle for tranquility is fought not in the external world, but in the landscape of consciousness itself. The Stoics discovered that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to what happens to us. This fundamental insight is the foundation upon which all peaceful sleep must be built. In our modern world, we are bombarded with stimulation from the moment we wake until the moment we attempt to sleep. Our minds are constantly processing information, solving problems, anticipating future scenarios, replaying past conversations. This mental hyperactivity is like having a radio that never turns off, playing static in the background of our consciousness. The Stoics understood that peace is not the absence of thoughts, but the presence of wisdom in how we relate to our thoughts. Epictetus, who was born a slave and yet became one of the most influential philosophers of all time, taught that our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our judgments about what happens to us. When you lie in bed tonight and your mind begins its familiar dance of worry and planning, remember that you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. You are the space in which thoughts arise and pass away. This recognition alone can bring immediate relief, a loosening of the tight grip that anxious thinking often has on our consciousness. The practice of Stoicism is not about becoming emotionally numb or indifferent to life's experiences. Rather, it is about developing the wisdom to distinguish between what we can influence and what we cannot, and then focusing our mental energy entirely on what is within our control. When you understand this deeply, sleep becomes easier because you are no longer carrying the weight of trying to control the uncontrollable. Seneca, the Roman statesman and philosopher, wrote extensively about the importance of preparing the mind for rest. He understood that the day's activities leave residues in consciousness, like dust that settles on furniture. Just as we clean our homes regularly, we must clean our minds regularly. This mental cleaning is not complicated, but it does require intention and practice. One of the most powerful Stoic practices for preparing the mind for sleep is what modern psychology calls cognitive distancing. When a worried thought arises, instead of immediately engaging with it, trying to solve it, or pushing it away, you simply observe it with the same detached interest you might have while watching clouds pass across the sky. You notice the thought, perhaps even naming it. There is a worried thought about tomorrow's meeting. And then you let it pass without becoming entangled in its narrative. This practice transforms your relationship with your own thinking. Instead of being at the mercy of whatever thoughts happen to arise, you become the conscious director of your attention. You begin to recognize that thoughts are temporary phenomena, like weather patterns in the sky of consciousness. Some thoughts are useful and deserve your attention. Others are simply mental noise that can be acknowledged and released. The Stoics also understood the importance of gratitude as a pathway to inner peace. Marcus Aurelius regularly practiced what we might call gratitude accounting, taking time to acknowledge the good things in his life, however small they might seem. This practice was not naive optimism, but a deliberate choice to balance the mind's natural tendency to focus on problems and deficiencies. When you practice gratitude before sleep, you are not denying the existence of problems in your life. You are choosing to end the day by acknowledging what went well, what you are thankful for, what brought you joy or satisfaction. This shift in focus naturally relaxes the nervous system and prepares the body for rest. The wisdom of the Stoics reminds us that every moment is an opportunity to choose peace over agitation, acceptance over resistance, wisdom over reactivity. As you prepare for sleep tonight, know that you are joining a conversation that has been going on for over 2,000 years, a conversation about how to live with dignity, wisdom, and inner tranquility regardless of external circumstances. This is not just about sleeping better. This is about living better, and the two are intimately connected. The journey toward peaceful sleep is also a journey toward a peaceful life. Each night that you practice these principles, you strengthen your capacity for resilience, wisdom, and joy. Each morning that you wake refreshed, you are better equipped to meet whatever the day may bring with equanimity and grace. The Stoics understood that we cannot control the world, but we can control our response to the world, and in that response lies all the peace we will ever need. The first and perhaps most fundamental lesson the Stoics would teach us about preparing for sleep is understanding the nature of what they called the inner noise, that constant chatter of thoughts, worries, and mental preoccupations that seems to intensify the moment our heads touch the pillow. This inner noise is not a sign of weakness or failure. It is simply the natural activity of a mind that has been trained by modern life to be constantly processing, analyzing, and problem-solving. Think of your mind throughout the day as a busy marketplace filled with merchants calling out their wares, customers haggling over prices, and the general din of commerce and activity. When evening comes and the marketplace should close, sometimes the voices continue echoing in the empty spaces, creating a phantom bustle that prevents the natural quiet that should descend. This is what happens in our consciousness when we attempt to transition from the active engagement of daytime to the receptive stillness of night. The Stoics recognize that fighting against this inner noise often makes it louder and more persistent. Epictetus taught that the more we resist what is already present, the more power we give it over our peace of mind. Instead of trying to forcefully silence the mental chatter, the wise approach is to change our relationship with it. We learn to observe the noise without becoming entangled in its content, to notice the thoughts without feeling compelled to solve every problem they present or follow every narrative they suggest. One of the most effective ways to work with inner noise is through what we might call mental noting. When you notice your mind spinning with concerns about tomorrow's presentation, instead of diving into detailed planning or worry, you simply note, planning thoughts arising. When you find yourself replaying an uncomfortable conversation from earlier in the day, instead of analyzing every word and gesture, you note, reviewing thoughts present. This simple practice of labeling what is happening in your mind creates a small but crucial distance between you and the mental activity. This distance is freedom. It is the space in which choice becomes possible. When you are completely identified with your thoughts, when you believe that you are your thoughts, then you have no choice but to be carried along by whatever mental current happens to be flowing. But when you recognize yourself as the observer of thoughts rather than the thoughts themselves, you can choose which thoughts deserve your attention and which can be allowed to pass by like leaves floating down a stream. The practice of observing mental noise without resistance is particularly powerful at bedtime because it naturally leads to a state of relaxed awareness. Instead of your mind being a battlefield where you fight against unwanted thoughts, it becomes more like a vast sky in which clouds of thought can form and dissolve without disturbing the essential spaciousness of consciousness itself. Another crucial aspect of working with inner noise is understanding its triggers. The Stoics were keen observers of cause and effect, particularly in the realm of mental states. They understood that certain activities, inputs, or environmental factors tend to increase mental agitation, while others promote calm. In our modern context, this might mean recognizing that checking your phone right before bed tends to activate planning and problem-solving modes of thinking, or that consuming news or engaging in difficult conversations close to bedtime tends to leave the mind churning with reactions and responses. Marcus Aurelius was particularly skilled at what we might call cognitive hygiene, the practice of carefully managing the inputs to his mind, especially during vulnerable transition periods like the shift from day to night. He understood that the mind is like a garden. Whatever seeds you plant will grow. If you plant seeds of worry, anxiety, and mental stimulation right before sleep, these will flourish in the quiet darkness. If instead you plant seeds of gratitude, acceptance, and peaceful reflection, these gentler states will have space to bloom. The Stoics also recognize the importance of routine in managing inner noise. Just as the body benefits from consistent sleep and wake times, the mind benefits from consistent pre-sleep rituals that signal the transition from active engagement to receptive rest. These rituals need not be elaborate or time-consuming. They might involve a few minutes of gentle reflection on the day, a brief gratitude practice, some simple breathing exercises, or the reading of inspiring or calming material. The key is consistency and intention. When you perform the same calming activities in the same sequence each night, You train your nervous system to begin relaxing even before you lie down. The routine itself becomes a signal that it is safe to let down your guard, to release the day's concerns, and to trust in the natural process of sleep. One of the most profound insights from Stoic philosophy is that inner noise often intensifies when we try to control things that are beyond our control. Much of our mental chatter consists of planning for contingencies we cannot predict, worrying about outcomes we cannot guarantee, or replaying scenarios we cannot change. The Stoics developed what they called the dichotomy of control, a clear understanding of what is up to us and what is not up to us. What is up to us? Our thoughts, our judgments, our values, our responses to situations. What is not up to us? Other people's actions, natural events, the past, most aspects of the future, and outcomes that depend on factors beyond our influence. When we try to control what is not up to us, we create unnecessary mental friction that manifests as anxiety, frustration, and the kind of mental spinning that prevents peaceful sleep. The practice of sorting our concerns into these two categories, what we can control and what we cannot, is incredibly liberating. It allows us to focus our mental energy where it can actually make a difference and to release our grip on everything else. This sorting process is particularly valuable as part of an evening routine, as it helps clear the mind of unnecessary burdens before sleep. Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of ending each day with a review of our actions and thoughts, not for the purpose of harsh self-judgment, but for the sake of learning and growth. This evening review serves multiple purposes. It provides closure for the day's activities. It offers opportunities to extract wisdom from our experiences, and it helps identify patterns of thinking or behavior that either support or undermine our peace of mind. The evening review need not be formal or lengthy. It might involve simply asking yourself, what went well today? What did I learn? What am I grateful for? What would I do differently if faced with a similar situation? This gentle inquiry helps the mind process the day's events in a constructive way, reducing the likelihood that they will resurface as mental noise during the night. Perhaps most importantly, working with inner noise requires patience and self-compassion. The mind has been conditioned by years or decades of particular patterns of thinking and reacting. These patterns will not change overnight, and expecting them to do so only creates additional mental pressure. The Stoics understood that wisdom develops gradually through consistent practice over time. Each night that you work with your mental noise rather than against it, you strengthen your capacity for inner peace. Each time you observe your thoughts without being overwhelmed by them, you expand the space of freedom in your consciousness. Each evening that you practice sorting your concerns into what you can and cannot control, you develop the wisdom that leads to genuine tranquility. The ultimate goal is not to eliminate all thoughts or to achieve a perfectly quiet mind. Such a state would be neither possible nor desirable. The goal is to develop a wise and peaceful relationship with the natural activity of consciousness, to be able to rest in awareness itself rather than being carried away by the content of awareness. When you achieve this, sleep becomes not an escape from life, but a natural expression of the deep trust and acceptance that characterize the Stoic way of being. This understanding of inner noise naturally leads us to recognize what the Stoics identified as the particular vulnerabilities that emerge in the darkness, those mental and emotional traps that seem to lie in wait for us when the day's distractions fade away. The ancient philosophers understood that nighttime consciousness operates by different rules than daytime awareness, and they developed specific strategies for navigating what we might call the nocturnal landscape of the mind. When external stimulation diminishes and we find ourselves alone with our thoughts, certain patterns of thinking tend to become magnified and distorted. A minor disagreement from earlier in the day can transform into evidence of fundamental relationship problems. A small mistake at work can balloon into fears about job security and professional competence. A physical ache can become the seed of catastrophic health concerns. The Stoics recognized these nocturnal distortions not as accurate assessments of reality, but as predictable tricks that the mind plays on itself when left unguided in the darkness. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about what he called the impressions that arise in consciousness, the initial thoughts and feelings that present themselves to our awareness. He understood that these impressions often arrive with a sense of urgency and importance that is not proportional to their actual significance. In the vulnerability of nighttime, when our rational defenses are lowered and our emotional sensitivity is heightened, these impressions can feel overwhelmingly real and pressing. The key insight from Stoic practice is that we always have a choice in how we respond to these nocturnal impressions. We can accept them at face value, allowing them to trigger cascades of worried thinking and emotional reactivity. Or we can examine them with the gentle skepticism of someone who understands that thoughts arising in the darkness often lack the clarity and proportion they will have in the light of day. One of the most common nocturnal traps is what we might call problem amplification. During the day, when we are engaged in activities and interactions, problems tend to remain in perspective. We see them as challenges to be addressed, but not as threats to our fundamental well-being. At night, however, the same problems can seem enormous and insurmountable. The presentation we need to give next week becomes a potential career disaster. The tension with a family member becomes evidence of irreparable relationship damage. The financial concern becomes a path to certain ruin. The Stoics understood that this amplification occurs partly because nighttime consciousness naturally turns inward, and partly because the absence of immediate distraction allows the mind to spin elaborate scenarios based on limited information. Epictetus taught that most of our suffering comes not from actual events, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. In the darkness, we become particularly susceptible to dramatic and pessimistic storytelling. The antidote to problem amplification is what we might call perspective restoration. When you notice your mind beginning to catastrophize about a particular concern, you can gently remind yourself that problems almost always seem larger and more threatening at night than they actually are. This is not denial or wishful thinking. It is simply an acknowledgement of how consciousness operates differently in different states and circumstances. Another common nocturnal trap is the replaying of past events, particularly those that involved conflict, embarrassment, or perceived failure. The mind seems to have an almost compulsive tendency to review and reanalyze these experiences, searching for different things we could have said or done, or trying to understand exactly how and why things went wrong. This mental replaying rarely leads to useful insights or resolution. Instead, it typically generates regret, self-criticism, and the kind of emotional activation that makes sleep impossible. The Stoics approached this tendency with characteristic practical wisdom. Seneca acknowledged that reviewing our actions and experiences can be valuable for learning and growth, but he distinguished between productive reflection and unproductive rumination. Productive reflection involves asking constructive questions. What can I learn from this experience? How might I handle a similar situation differently in the future? What does this reveal about my values or priorities? Unproductive rumination, on the other hand, involves endless replaying of events without any intention of learning or growth, often accompanied by harsh self-judgment and emotional distress. When you find yourself caught in unproductive rumination at bedtime, the Stoic approach is neither to fight against these thoughts nor to indulge them, but to redirect your attention toward more constructive mental activities. This might involve shifting from, "What if I had said something different?" to, "What did I learn about effective communication?" Or from, "I can't believe I made that mistake," to, "How can I prepare better for similar challenges in the future?" A third nocturnal trap that the Stoics identified is excessive future projection. the tendency to spend mental energy trying to plan for and control outcomes that are largely beyond our influence. While some amount of future planning is necessary and healthy, the darkness seems to invite a particular kind of anxious forecasting that focuses on all the things that might go wrong and all the ways we might not be adequate to handle them. This future-focused anxiety is particularly insidious because it masquerades as productivity. We tell ourselves that we are being responsible and proactive by thinking through all the possible complications and challenges that might arise. In reality, most of this mental activity is neither productive nor necessary. It is simply worry dressed up as planning. The Stoics distinguished between prudent preparation and anxious projection. Prudent preparation involves taking reasonable steps to address foreseeable challenges based on information and circumstances that are actually known. Anxious projection involves elaborate mental scenarios based on speculation, assumption, and often the worst-case thinking that flourishes in the vulnerable hours before sleep. Marcus Aurelius regularly reminded himself that the future does not exist except as a mental construct, and that we cannot control outcomes that depend on factors beyond our influence. This recognition allows us to focus our planning energy on the aspects of future situations that we actually can influence, primarily our own preparation, responses, and choices, while releasing our grip on everything else. Perhaps the most subtle and pervasive of the nocturnal traps is what we might call meaning-making overactivity. The human mind has a powerful drive to understand, to find patterns, to create coherent narratives that explain our experiences. During the day, this capacity serves us well. At night, however, it can become problematic when we try to find deep significance in every thought, feeling, or event that comes to mind. A random memory surfaces, and we assume it must be trying to tell us something important. A physical sensation arises, and we interpret it as a meaningful sign about our health or well-being. A feeling of sadness or anxiety appears, and we immediately begin searching for its cause and significance. This constant meaning-making can turn the natural flow of consciousness into a source of stress and preoccupation. The Stoics understood that not every mental event needs to be analyzed, understood, or acted upon. Sometimes a thought is just a thought, a feeling is just a feeling, and a memory is just a memory. The capacity to let experiences arise and pass away without immediately trying to extract meaning or significance from them is a form of mental hygiene that promotes both psychological health and peaceful sleep. Learning to recognize these nocturnal traps is the first step in disarming them. When you notice your mind beginning to amplify problems, replay past events, project anxiously into the future, or overanalyze every mental phenomenon, you can gently acknowledge what is happening without being swept away by it. You might simply note to yourself, problem amplification is happening, or future projection is arising, or meaning-making is active. This gentle noting creates the psychological space necessary for choice. Instead of being unconsciously carried along by these mental patterns, you become a conscious participant in your own mental processes. From this place of awareness, you can choose to redirect your attention toward more peaceful and constructive mental activities, or simply to rest in the spacious awareness that observes all mental activity without being disturbed by any of it. The Stoics remind us that these nocturnal challenges are not personal failures or signs of mental weakness. They are simply part of the human condition, predictable patterns that arise when consciousness encounters the particular conditions of darkness and solitude. Understanding this can help us meet these experiences with patience and compassion rather than frustration and self-criticism. This compassionate understanding of our mental patterns reveals one of the most insidious obstacles to peaceful sleep: the cycle of anxiety that can develop specifically around the act of sleeping itself. The Stoics, with their keen observation of human psychology, understood that our relationship with sleep can become a source of suffering when we approach it with too much effort, expectation, and control. When we desperately need sleep, perhaps after a difficult day or before an important event, the very intensity of our desire for rest can become the barrier to achieving it. This creates what modern psychology recognizes as performance anxiety, but which the Stoics understood as a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of sleep and our relationship to natural processes that are beyond direct conscious control. Epictetus taught that much of our suffering comes from wanting things to be different from how they are, and this principle applies powerfully to our experience with sleep. When we lie in bed thinking, "I must sleep now," or "I should be asleep by this time," or "what if I don't get enough rest?" we are essentially fighting against the present moment reality and trying to force an outcome that cannot be forced. Sleep, like many of the most important processes in life, operates according to its own wisdom and timing. It is more like the blooming of a flower or the flowing of a river than like the completion of a task or the solving of a problem. We can create conditions that support sleep, just as we can create conditions that support the growth of a garden, but we cannot make sleep happen through effort, or will any more than we can make a flower bloom by pulling on its petals. The anxiety cycle around sleep typically begins with a night or two of poor rest. This might be caused by external circumstances, stress at work, relationship concerns, health worries, or simply the natural fluctuations that occur in any biological system. The initial sleep difficulty is often not problematic in itself. The problem arises when we begin to worry about the sleep difficulty, creating additional mental and emotional activation that makes sleep even more elusive. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the importance of accepting what he called the nature of things. He understood that trying to force natural processes to conform to our schedules and preferences is a recipe for frustration and suffering. This insight is particularly relevant to sleep, which operates according to complex biological rhythms that are influenced by factors ranging from circadian cycles to hormonal fluctuations to the accumulated stress and stimulation of our daily lives. When we approach sleep with acceptance rather than demand, we create the internal conditions that actually support rest. Instead of lying in bed with mounting frustration about not being asleep yet, we can rest in the simple reality of being horizontal, breathing naturally, and allowing our body and mind to settle at their own pace. This shift from effortful trying to receptive allowing often creates the very relaxation that invites sleep to return. The Stoics understood that this principle of acceptance applies not just to individual nights of sleep, but to our overall relationship with rest. Some nights we will sleep deeply and wake refreshed. Other nights will be lighter or more restless. Some periods of our lives will be characterized by easy, natural sleep patterns. Other periods may involve more struggle with rest, perhaps due to life changes, health concerns, or external stressors. Rather than seeing variations in sleep quality as problems to be solved or failures to be corrected, we can understand them as part of the natural ebb and flow of human experience. This broader perspective helps prevent the development of chronic sleep anxiety, where we become so worried about our sleep that the worry itself becomes the primary obstacle to rest. Seneca wrote about what he called preferred indifference, things that we might naturally prefer to have rather than not have, but which do not determine our fundamental well-being or peace of mind. A good night's sleep is certainly preferable to a restless night, but our essential tranquility need not depend on getting exactly the amount or quality of sleep we think we need. This doesn't mean we should be passive about sleep or ignore the factors that support healthy rest. The Stoics were intensely practical people who believed in taking appropriate action to address the challenges of life. But they distinguished between wise action taken from a place of calm acceptance and desperate action taken from a place of anxiety and attachment to specific outcomes. Wise action around sleep might include creating regular bedtime routines, managing the stimulation we expose ourselves to in the evening hours, addressing sources of stress that might be affecting our rest, or making environmental changes that support better sleep. These actions are taken not from desperation or fear, but from a place of caring for ourselves and creating conditions that support our overall well-being. The key distinction is that when we take these actions from a place of acceptance, we can engage in them without attachment to immediate results. We create good sleep conditions because it is wise to do so, not because we are trying to guarantee specific outcomes. This subtle shift in motivation makes an enormous difference in the mental and emotional state we bring to bedtime. One of the most powerful practices for breaking the anxiety cycle around sleep is what we might call productive resting. This involves recognizing that even if sleep does not come immediately or deeply on a particular night, the time spent lying quietly, breathing naturally, and resting the body is still valuable and restorative. The body benefits from horizontal rest even when the mind is not fully asleep, and the mind benefits from the reduced stimulation and increased inward focus that come with bedtime routines. When we can genuinely appreciate the value of simply resting, rather than seeing anything short of deep sleep as a failure, we remove much of the performance pressure that can keep us awake. We can lie in bed with a sense of accomplishment about giving our body and mind this gift of rest, rather than with mounting frustration about not being asleep yet. This practice of productive resting also helps us work more skillfully with the thoughts and concerns that might arise during wakeful periods at night. Instead of seeing these mental activities as obstacles to sleep that must be eliminated, we can see them as opportunities to practice the kind of gentle awareness and acceptance that characterize Stoic wisdom. When worried thoughts arise during the night, we can observe them with the same patient attention we might give to clouds passing across the sky. We notice them, acknowledge them, perhaps even learn from them, but we don't feel compelled to solve every problem they present or follow every narrative they suggest. This quality of relaxed awareness often naturally leads to the kind of mental settling that allows sleep to emerge organically. The Stoics also understood the importance of perspective when dealing with temporary sleep difficulties. They recognized that individual nights exist within the context of weeks, months, and years, and that the overall pattern of our rest is more significant than any single night's experience. A few nights of poor sleep, while temporarily uncomfortable, rarely have lasting consequences for our health or well-being. This longer view helps prevent the catastrophic thinking that can develop around sleep problems. Instead of thinking, "I'm never going to be able to sleep normally again," or "this is ruining my health," we can maintain perspective by remembering that sleep patterns naturally fluctuate, and that our bodies have remarkable capacities for adaptation and recovery. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself of the impermanent nature of all experiences, both pleasant and unpleasant. He would tell himself that whatever he was experiencing, whether physical discomfort, emotional difficulty, or mental distress, was temporary and would pass. This same wisdom applies to sleep difficulties. Even the most persistent patterns of insomnia are subject to change, and maintaining faith in this possibility helps prevent the kind of despair that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Perhaps most importantly, the Stoic approach to sleep anxiety involves cultivating what we might call outcome independence. This means engaging in practices that support good sleep, not because we are attached to getting a specific result, but because these practices represent wise self-care regardless of their immediate effects on our rest. When we can truly let go of demanding that sleep happen on our timeline and according to our specifications, we often discover that sleep returns naturally. It's as if our very willingness to be awake, to rest peacefully even without sleeping deeply, creates the conditions of surrender and trust that allow natural sleep rhythms to reassert themselves. This surrender is not passive resignation, but active acceptance. A conscious choice to work with our experience as it is, rather than fighting against it. In this acceptance, we often find not only better sleep, but also a deeper understanding of what it means to live with wisdom and peace in a world that we cannot fully control. This practice of surrender and acceptance creates the ideal conditions for what the Stoics understood to be one of the most practical and immediately effective approaches to mental overwhelm: the intentional discharge of accumulated thoughts and concerns that have built up throughout the day. Just as we might empty our pockets before bed, removing the physical items we have carried throughout the day, our minds benefit from a similar process of conscious unloading before we attempt to rest. The human mind, particularly in our information-rich modern world, accumulates an enormous amount of mental content during waking hours. Conversations that need follow-up, problems that require solutions, creative ideas that want expression, emotional reactions that need processing, planning thoughts about future events, and reflective thoughts about past experiences. All of these mental contents can create what we might think of as psychological pressure that builds throughout the day. When we lie down to sleep with this accumulated mental pressure still present, it's like trying to rest while carrying a heavy backpack. The weight may not be immediately unbearable, but it creates a constant background tension that prevents the deep relaxation necessary for restorative sleep. The Stoics, with their practical approach to mental hygiene, developed various methods for consciously releasing this accumulated mental content before attempting to rest. One of the most effective techniques for mental discharge involves what we might call thought externalization. The process of taking the thoughts that are circulating in your mind and giving them a physical form outside of your consciousness. This can be accomplished through writing, but it can also happen through speaking aloud to yourself, drawing, or even organizing physical objects as a way of organizing mental contents. The act of writing is particularly powerful for thought discharge because it requires us to translate the often vague, swirling, and interconnected nature of mental content into the linear, specific, and concrete form of written language. When you write down a worry, you are forced to articulate exactly what you are concerned about, which often reveals that the worry is either less significant than it seemed when it was floating around in your mind, or that it has specific, actionable components that can be addressed during appropriate waking hours. The process of writing for mental discharge is different from journaling for self-reflection or creative expression. The goal is not to craft beautiful prose or to achieve deep insights, but simply to empty the mind of its accumulated contents so that it can rest. You might write stream of consciousness style, letting thoughts flow onto paper without worrying about grammar, organization, or coherence. You might make lists of concerns, tasks, or ideas. You might write letters you will never send, expressing feelings that need acknowledgement, but not necessarily communication. The key principle is that once something is written down, you give yourself permission to stop thinking about it for the night. The paper becomes an external storage device for thoughts that don't need to be processed immediately. This creates what psychologists call a cognitive offloading effect, the mental relief that comes from knowing that important information is safely stored somewhere other than in active memory. Marcus Aurelius demonstrated this principle in his own practice of writing what became known as the Meditations. These were not philosophical treatises written for public consumption, but private notes to himself, ways of working through concerns, clarifying his thinking, and processing the complex demands of leading the Roman Empire. The act of writing helped him discharge mental pressure and gain perspective on the challenges he faced. For modern practitioners, the thought discharge process might take only 10 to 15 minutes before bed, but the effects can be profound. People often report that once they have written down their concerns and mentally handed them over to the piece of paper, their minds naturally begin to quiet and their bodies begin to relax. The simple act of acknowledgement, recognizing what has been occupying mental space, can be enormously relieving. This process is particularly effective for what psychologists call open loops, mental tasks, or concerns that feel unfinished or unresolved. Our minds have a natural tendency to keep circling back to these open loops, trying to find closure or resolution. When we write them down with a clear intention to address them at an appropriate time, we give the mind permission to release its vigilant hold on these concerns. The discharge process can also include what we might call emotional externalization, giving expression to feelings that have accumulated during the day but haven't been fully acknowledged or processed. Sometimes we carry emotional tension without fully realizing it, and the quiet moments before sleep can be when these accumulated feelings finally surface. Rather than trying to analyze or resolve these emotions immediately, the discharge approach involves simply acknowledging them and giving them expression. You might write, "I felt frustrated during the meeting with my colleague," or "I experienced sadness when I thought about my friend's struggles," or "I noticed anxiety about the upcoming deadline." The goal is not to solve or fix these emotional experiences, but to recognize them and create space for them to exist without having to carry them into sleep. Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of what he called daily accounting, a regular practice of reviewing the day's events, not with harsh judgment, but with honest acknowledgement of what occurred, what was learned, and what might be approached differently in the future. This daily accounting serves as a form of mental discharge, providing closure for the day's activities and clearing the mind for rest. The discharge process can extend beyond thoughts and emotions to include what we might call energetic residues from the day's interactions and activities. Sometimes we carry subtle tensions or activations from conversations, environments, or experiences without fully realizing it. The transition to sleep provides an opportunity to consciously release these residues. This might involve imagining yourself setting down invisible burdens you have been carrying, or visualizing the day's concerns flowing out of your body like water draining from a container. Some people find it helpful to physically gesture as part of this release, perhaps stretching their arms and then letting them fall, or taking a deep breath and then exhaling with an audible sigh that represents letting go. The Stoics understood that this discharge process should be approached with compassion rather than judgment. The goal is not to criticize ourselves for having concerns or carrying mental tension, but simply to acknowledge these as natural aspects of engaged living and to create healthy boundaries between the activities of the day and the rest of the night. Sometimes the discharge process reveals that we are carrying concerns that don't actually belong to us. Worries about other people's problems that we cannot solve, anxiety about situations we cannot control, or emotional reactions to news events or social media content that don't require our personal response. Writing these concerns down can help us recognize when we are carrying burdens that we can legitimately set aside. The practice of mental discharge also helps develop what we might call cognitive trust, confidence in our ability to address concerns and challenges during appropriate waking hours. When we regularly practice the discipline of setting aside evening time for rest and trusting that important matters can be addressed tomorrow, we strengthen our overall capacity for mental balance and emotional regulation. This trust is particularly important in our culture of constant connectivity, where there can be pressure to be always available, always responsive, and always working on something. The discharge process helps create healthy boundaries around rest, establishing that there are times when it is not only acceptable but necessary to step away from problem-solving and productivity in order to restore our mental and physical resources. One of the most profound effects of regular mental discharge practice is that it gradually trains the mind to naturally settle more quickly in the evening. When the mind learns that there will be a designated time and process for acknowledging and releasing the day's accumulated contents, it doesn't need to keep circulating these contents throughout the night. The discharge process becomes a signal that the transition to rest has begun. The effectiveness of thought discharge also depends on our willingness to truly let go once the process is complete. This means resisting the temptation to pick up the concerns again once they have been written down or expressed. If the mind tries to return to a worry that has already been discharged, we can gently remind ourselves that this concern has been acknowledged and will be available for attention tomorrow if needed. This letting go is ultimately an act of faith. Faith in our ability to handle tomorrow's challenges with tomorrow's energy. Faith in the value of rest as a foundation for effective action. And faith in the wisdom of natural cycles of activity and rest that govern all healthy systems. This faith in natural cycles points us toward one of the most fundamental insights of Stoic philosophy as it applies to sleep. The recognition that peaceful rest emerges naturally when we learn to anchor ourselves fully in the present moment, rather than allowing our consciousness to drift into the past or future. The Stoics understood that most mental agitation comes from what we might call temporal displacement, the tendency of the mind to leave the safety and simplicity of the current moment and venture into the complex territories of memory and projection. When we lie in bed at night, our bodies are present, resting on the mattress, breathing in the current air, existing in the immediate physical reality of this specific time and place. Our minds, however, often travel elsewhere. They revisit conversations from earlier in the day, replay moments we wish we had handled differently, or project forward into tomorrow's challenges and uncertainties. This temporal wandering creates a fundamental disconnection between the body, which is ready for rest, and the mind, which is actively engaged with times and places that exist only in thought. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about what he called the discipline of perception, the practice of seeing things as they actually are in the present moment, stripped of the stories, interpretations, and projections that we typically add to our direct experience. When applied to the transition into sleep, this discipline involves learning to perceive the immediate reality of lying in bed, breathing naturally, and allowing the body to settle, without overlaying this simple experience with complex narratives about sleep performance, tomorrow's responsibilities, or yesterday's concerns. The power of present moment awareness lies partly in its simplicity. The present moment, when experienced directly rather than through the filter of thought, is remarkably uncomplicated. There is the sensation of the body resting, the rhythm of breathing, perhaps sounds from the environment, and the basic awareness that notices all of these experiences. This simplicity is inherently calming to the nervous system, which can finally stop processing complex information and rest in basic sensory awareness. Epictetus taught that we suffer not because of what happens to us, but because of our judgments and stories about what happens to us. This insight applies powerfully to our experience of lying in bed. The simple physical reality of being horizontal, breathing and resting is generally pleasant, or at least neutral. The suffering that can arise around bedtime typically comes from the stories we tell ourselves. I should be asleep by now. I'm going to be tired tomorrow. I never sleep well anymore. Or, this anxiety is going to keep me awake all night. When we learn to distinguish between the direct experience of resting and the stories we tell ourselves about that experience, we can choose to focus on the former while allowing the latter to pass by without engaging with them. The direct experience of resting, the feeling of muscles relaxing, the steady rhythm of breathing, the support of the mattress, is usually quite pleasant when we give it our full attention. This practice of present moment anchoring during the transition to sleep can be supported by what the Stoics called prosoche, a quality of attention that is simultaneously relaxed and vigilant, open and focused. This attention is different from the concentrated effort we might apply to a challenging task during the day. It's more like the gentle awareness we might have while watching a sunset or listening to music, engaged but not effortful, interested but not demanding. One way to cultivate this quality of attention at bedtime is through what we might call sensory anchoring, deliberately focusing on the immediate sensory experiences that are available in the present moment. This might involve feeling the texture and temperature of your sheets against your skin, noticing the support your body receives from the mattress and pillows, or observing the natural rhythm of your breathing without trying to change or control it. The breath is particularly powerful as a present moment anchor because it is always available, always occurring in the now, and naturally tends to become slower and deeper as we relax. When you notice your mind beginning to wander into past or future scenarios, you can gently redirect your attention to the simple sensation of breathing, the coolness of air entering through your nostrils, the slight pause at the end of each inhalation, the warmth of air as it leaves your body. This redirection doesn't need to be forceful or judgmental. The Stoics understood that the mind's tendency to wander is natural and not a sign of failure. When you notice that your attention has drifted away from present moment awareness, you can simply acknowledge this with gentle interest. Oh, the mind has been planning tomorrow's schedule. And then softly return your attention to immediate sensory experience. The practice of present moment anchoring also helps address what psychologists call metacognitive anxiety. Anxiety about anxiety, or worry about worry. Sometimes when we're trying to fall asleep, we become anxious about the fact that we're feeling anxious, or worried about the fact that we're having worried thoughts. This creates layers of mental activity that compound the original disturbance. When we anchor our attention in present moment sensory experience, we step out of these recursive loops of thinking about thinking. Instead of being caught up in mental commentary about our mental state, we can rest in the simple reality of bodily sensations that exist independent of our thoughts about them. The body breathing, the body resting, the body settling. These experiences are immediate and real in a way that thoughts about these experiences are not. Seneca wrote about the importance of what he called recollection, not in the sense of remembering the past, but in the sense of gathering our scattered attention back to ourselves, back to the present moment, back to what is immediately real and available. This practice of recollection is particularly valuable at bedtime, when the day's activities may have left our attention dispersed across multiple concerns and preoccupations. The process of recollection might begin with a gentle mental inventory. Where is my attention right now? What am I thinking about? What am I feeling? What am I experiencing in my body? This inventory is not conducted with the goal of changing anything, but simply with the intention of becoming aware of your current state. From this awareness, you can consciously choose to gather your attention back to the immediate present. Sometimes present moment awareness at bedtime reveals physical tensions or discomforts that we hadn't noticed while we were busy with daytime activities. Rather than seeing these sensations as problems to be solved, the Stoic approach involves acknowledging them as information about our current state and working with them skillfully. You might notice tension in your shoulders and respond by gently adjusting your position or taking a deeper breath that allows those muscles to soften. The Stoics understood that present moment awareness doesn't mean forcing ourselves to feel only pleasant sensations or to have only peaceful thoughts. Sometimes the present moment contains discomfort, worry, or restlessness. The practice involves learning to be present with whatever is actually occurring, rather than trying to manufacture a particular state of consciousness. This acceptance of present moment reality, whatever it contains, often creates the very relaxation we were seeking. When we stop fighting against our current experience, stop trying to force sleepiness, stop resisting worried thoughts, stop demanding that our bodies feel different than they do, we often discover that the experience naturally begins to shift toward greater ease and comfort. The transition into sleep becomes less like trying to make something happen and more like allowing something to unfold. Instead of effortfully pursuing sleep, we rest in present moment awareness and trust that sleep will emerge when the conditions are right. This trust is itself a form of present moment awareness, a recognition that right now, in this moment, we are safe, we are resting, and we can let go of the need to control what happens next. One of the most profound aspects of present moment anchoring is that it naturally connects us with what the Stoics called the eternal now, the recognition that all of life, all of experience, all of existence occurs only in the present moment. Past and future exist only as mental constructions in the present. This recognition can bring a sense of vastness and perspective that puts temporary concerns about sleep or daily worries into a larger context. When we rest in present moment awareness, we are participating in the fundamental reality of existence itself. We are not separate from the natural world with its cycles of activity and rest, growth and dormancy, waking and sleeping. We are expressions of these same natural rhythms, and when we align ourselves with the present moment, we align ourselves with the deeper intelligence that governs all natural processes. This alignment doesn't require effort or special techniques. It simply requires a willingness to be where we are, when we are, as we are. In the darkness of night, lying in bed, breathing naturally, we can rest in the profound simplicity of existence itself. From this place of connection with what is most fundamental and real, sleep often emerges as naturally as night follows day. This natural emergence of sleep through present moment alignment points us toward one of the most accessible and powerful tools the Stoics employed for cultivating inner tranquility, the conscious use of breath as both an anchor to the present and a direct pathway to physiological calm. The ancient philosophers understood that breath occupies a unique position in human experience. It is both automatic and voluntary, both physical and subtle, both individual and universal. When we learn to work skillfully with the breath, we gain access to a remarkable capacity for self-regulation that can transform not only our sleep, but our entire relationship with stress and anxiety. Unlike many aspects of our experience that remain largely outside our direct influence, breathing offers us a point of immediate access to our nervous system. When we breathe shallowly and rapidly, we signal to our body that we are in a state of alertness or alarm. When we breathe deeply and slowly, we communicate safety and permission to relax. This communication happens below the level of conscious thought, through pathways that connect the respiratory system directly to the parts of our nervous system responsible for either activation or rest. The Stoics, while they may not have understood the precise physiological mechanisms involved, clearly recognized that conscious breathing could serve as a bridge between the voluntary and involuntary aspects of our experience. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the breath as a continuous reminder of our connection to the larger world. We are constantly exchanging the air within us with the air around us, participating in the same atmosphere that sustains all life on Earth. This cosmic perspective on breathing can be particularly soothing at bedtime, when we might feel isolated with our personal concerns and worries. When we remember that each breath connects us to the vast atmospheric systems of the planet, our individual troubles can be held within a much larger context. We are breathing the same air that has been breathed by countless beings throughout history, participating in cycles of exchange that are much larger and more enduring than our temporary anxieties. From a practical standpoint, conscious breathing at bedtime serves multiple functions. First, it gives the mind something specific and immediate to focus on, which naturally reduces the mental spinning that can keep us awake. Instead of following chains of worried thoughts or planning scenarios, we can direct our attention to the simple, rhythmic process of inhalation and exhalation. The rhythm of conscious breathing is inherently soothing to the nervous system. Unlike the irregular, unpredictable rhythms of thought or emotion, breath follows a steady, reliable pattern that the body recognizes as safe and stable. This regularity helps synchronize various bodily systems and promotes the kind of physiological coherence that supports rest and recovery. Epictetus taught his students to pay attention to the breath as a way of staying grounded in immediate reality, rather than being carried away by abstract concerns or imaginary scenarios. When we focus on breathing, we are automatically brought into the present moment, because breath always occurs now. We cannot breathe yesterday's breath or tomorrow's breath, only the breath that is happening in this moment. The practice of conscious breathing for sleep doesn't require complex techniques or special training. It can be as simple as noticing that you are breathing and choosing to observe this process with gentle attention. You might feel the cool air entering through your nostrils and the warmer air leaving your body. You might notice the slight pause that naturally occurs at the end of each inhalation and each exhalation. You might observe how your chest and abdomen move in coordination with each breath cycle. Some people find it helpful to count breaths as a way of maintaining focus. Inhaling on 1, exhaling on 2, inhaling on 3, and so on, perhaps counting up to 10 and then beginning again. Others prefer to silently repeat simple phrases in rhythm with their breathing. Breathing in peace on the inhalation, breathing out tension on the exhalation, or simply in and out to maintain gentle attention. The key principle is that conscious breathing should feel natural and effortless rather than forced or strained. We are not trying to change our breathing dramatically or to achieve any particular state of consciousness. We are simply choosing to notice and appreciate a process that is already happening, allowing our attention to rest in this most fundamental life activity. One of the remarkable aspects of conscious breathing is that it tends to naturally deepen and slow as we pay attention to it, without our having to make this happen deliberately. When we observe breathing with relaxed attention, the body often spontaneously begins to breathe more efficiently, taking fuller inhalations and more complete exhalations. This natural deepening activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which governs rest, repair, and regeneration. The exhale phase of breathing is particularly important for relaxation. Many people unconsciously hold tension by not fully exhaling, which can maintain a subtle state of alertness even when they are trying to rest. By gently encouraging complete exhalations, allowing the breath to flow out fully before the next inhalation begins, we can release physical and mental tension more effectively. Seneca wrote about the importance of what he called spiritual exercises, practices that train the mind in wisdom and virtue. Conscious breathing can be understood as one such exercise, cultivating qualities of patience, presence, and acceptance that extend far beyond the immediate context of falling asleep. Each time we choose to return our attention to the breath when the mind has wandered, we strengthen our capacity for mental discipline and emotional regulation. The practice of conscious breathing also helps us develop what the Stoics called preferred indifference toward immediate outcomes. When we can rest peacefully in the simple process of breathing, we become less attached to whether sleep comes quickly or slowly, deeply or lightly. The breathing itself becomes a form of rest and restoration, valuable in its own right, rather than merely as a means to an end. This shift from goal-oriented effort to process-oriented presence is one of the most important transitions we can make in our approach to sleep. Instead of trying to use breathing as a technique to make sleep happen, we can appreciate breathing as a way of being fully present with whatever is actually occurring in this moment. If sleep emerges from this presence, that is wonderful. If we simply rest peacefully in conscious breathing, that is also complete and valuable. The Stoics understood that this quality of presence, the ability to be fully engaged with immediate experience without being attached to particular outcomes, is one of the foundations of a wise and peaceful life. When we can breathe consciously without needing our breathing to produce specific results, we are practicing a form of what they called action without attachment, engaging fully with life while maintaining inner freedom. Conscious breathing can also serve as a refuge during those times when sleep seems particularly elusive. Instead of lying in bed feeling frustrated about being awake, we can use wakeful periods as opportunities to deepen our relationship with the breath. These times can become occasions for meditation, for quiet reflection, or simply for resting in the peaceful rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. Some of the most profound experiences of peace and insight can occur during these quiet, wakeful periods, when the usual distractions of daytime life are absent and we can settle into deeper layers of awareness. The Stoics would have seen such times not as failures of sleep, but as opportunities for the kind of contemplative practice that supports wisdom and spiritual growth. The breath also connects us to the larger rhythms of existence, the cycles of expansion and contraction, receiving and giving, holding and releasing that characterize all natural processes. When we align ourselves with these rhythms through conscious breathing, we participate more fully in the natural world, rather than feeling separate from it or in conflict with it. This sense of alignment and participation can be profoundly comforting, especially during times when we feel isolated by our personal struggles or overwhelmed by the challenges of modern life. The breath reminds us that we are not separate individuals trying to manage life through will and effort alone, but expressions of the same life force that moves through all beings, supported by the same intelligence that governs the movements of planets and the changing of seasons. As we learn to trust the breath, we also learn to trust the deeper processes of rest and renewal that operate below the level of conscious control. Just as we don't have to remember to make our hearts beat or our cells divide, we don't have to force sleep to happen. We can create supportive conditions through practices like conscious breathing, and then trust in the body's innate wisdom to orchestrate the complex processes of rest and recovery. This trust, cultivated through the simple practice of conscious breathing, becomes a foundation for approaching all of life with greater ease and confidence. When we know that we can always return to the breath as a source of immediate peace and stability, we become less reactive to external circumstances and more capable of maintaining inner equilibrium regardless of what challenges we may face. This foundation of trust and inner equilibrium that develops through conscious breathing naturally extends into how we structure our entire approach to the evening hours, revealing the profound wisdom of what the Stoics understood about the power of intentional ritual and routine in creating conditions that support both outer order and inner peace. The ancient philosophers recognized that human beings are creatures of habit, and that the quality of our habits largely determines the quality of our experience. When it comes to preparing for sleep, this insight becomes particularly relevant as the activities we choose in the hours leading up to bedtime create either conditions that support natural rest or conditions that maintain alertness and activation. Marcus Aurelius was a man who governed an empire with responsibilities and pressures that few of us can truly imagine, yet he understood the critical importance of maintaining regular practices that supported his mental clarity and emotional stability. His personal writings reveal someone who paid careful attention to the rhythms of his daily life, creating structure and routine not as rigid constraints, but as supportive frameworks that allowed him to meet each day's challenges with presence and wisdom. The modern world presents us with a particular challenge that the ancient Stoics did not face: the availability of constant stimulation and distraction, especially in the form of digital entertainment and information. Our devices can provide us with an endless stream of content: news, social media, videos, games, messages that can keep our minds engaged and activated well into the night hours. While this technology offers many benefits, It can also create significant obstacles to the kind of mental settling that natural sleep requires. The Stoic approach to this challenge would be to recognize that we have a choice about how we engage with these tools, and that wisdom lies in using them skillfully rather than being used by them. This might mean establishing clear boundaries around screen time in the evening hours, creating designated periods of digital silence, or choosing specific types of content that support calm rather than excitement or anxiety. The light emitted by digital screens presents not only a psychological challenge, but also a biological one. The blue wavelengths of light that our devices produce can interfere with the natural production of melatonin, the hormone that helps regulate our sleep-wake cycles. This means that even if we are consuming calming content on our devices, the light itself may be sending signals to our brain that it is still daytime and time to remain alert. Seneca wrote about the importance of what he called temporal boundaries, clear distinctions between different types of activities and different periods of the day. He understood that without such boundaries, the various demands and energies of life can bleed into each other, creating a sense of chaos and overwhelm that undermines both productivity and rest. Creating effective evening routines involves establishing these temporal boundaries in a way that honors the natural transition from day to night, from activity to rest, from external engagement to internal reflection. This transition need not be abrupt or rigid, but it does benefit from being intentional and consistent. The specific elements of an evening routine will vary from person to person, depending on individual preferences, living situations, and lifestyle demands. However, certain principles seem to be universally supportive of good sleep. These include gradually reducing stimulation as the evening progresses, engaging in activities that promote relaxation rather than excitement, and creating predictable signals that help the nervous system begin preparing for rest. One of the most effective ways to begin this transition is through what we might call environmental preparation, making physical changes to our surroundings that support the shift from daytime alertness to nighttime calm. This might involve dimming lights throughout the house, turning off or putting away electronic devices, preparing comfortable clothing for sleep, and ensuring that the bedroom environment is clean, quiet, and comfortable. These environmental changes serve as external signals that support internal changes in our state of consciousness. Just as the natural dimming of daylight helps trigger the release of sleep hormones in our bodies, the conscious dimming of artificial lights can support this same physiological transition. The Stoics understood that our physical environment both reflects and influences our mental state. When we create order and beauty in our external surroundings, we support order and peace in our internal experience. This principle applies powerfully to the bedroom, which can be seen as a sanctuary dedicated specifically to rest and renewal. Creating this sanctuary doesn't require expensive furniture or elaborate decoration. It simply requires attention to the basic elements that support comfort and tranquility: cleanliness, appropriate temperature, minimal visual clutter, and protection from excessive noise and light. When we enter this space, our bodies and minds can begin to recognize that it is time to shift into a different mode of being. The activities we choose as part of our evening routine are equally important as the environment we create. The Stoics valued activities that promote reflection, learning, and inner development, while being cautious about activities that generate excitement, anxiety, or mental agitation. Reading philosophical texts, writing in a journal, engaging in gentle physical movement, or practicing meditation are examples of activities that can support the transition to sleep. The key is to choose activities that feel nourishing rather than depleting, calming rather than stimulating, and personally meaningful rather than merely distracting. Some people find that listening to peaceful music helps them unwind, while others prefer complete silence. Some benefit from gentle stretching or yoga, while others prefer to sit quietly in reflection. The important thing is to discover what works for your particular constitution and circumstances, and then to practice these activities consistently. Epictetus taught that we become what we repeatedly practice, and this principle applies strongly to our evening routines. When we consistently engage in calming activities before bed, we train our nervous systems to recognize these activities as signals that it is time to begin relaxing. Over time, simply beginning our evening routine can trigger physiological changes that support sleep, even before we actually lie down. This conditioning effect is one reason why consistency in timing can be as important as consistency in activities. When we go to bed and wake up at roughly the same times each day, we support our body's natural circadian rhythms, the internal biological clock that helps regulate sleep, hormone production, body temperature, and many other physiological processes. The Stoics were deeply attuned to natural cycles and rhythms, understanding that human well-being depends partly on staying aligned with the larger patterns of the natural world. In our modern environment, with artificial lighting and climate control, it can be easy to lose touch with these natural rhythms, but we can consciously choose to honor them through our evening routines. This might mean beginning our wind-down activities when the sun sets, regardless of what time that happens to be, or spending a few minutes outside in the evening air, connecting with the natural world before retreating indoors for the night. These simple practices help remind us that we are part of larger cycles of activity and rest that extend far beyond our individual lives. The social dimension of evening routines is also worth considering. In many cultures throughout history, the evening hours have been times for family gathering, storytelling, quiet conversation, and shared reflection on the day's experiences. These social activities can be deeply nourishing and can help create a sense of connection and belonging that supports peaceful sleep. However, the quality of our evening social interactions matters as much as their presence. Conversations that involve conflict, intense problem-solving, or high emotional intensity can be activating rather than calming. The Stoic approach would be to engage in evening social time that supports harmony and peace rather than drama and excitement. Sometimes this means having difficult conversations earlier in the day when we have more energy for working through challenges constructively. Sometimes it means setting gentle boundaries around the types of topics we discuss in the evening hours. And sometimes it means choosing solitude over social interaction when we need time and space to process the day's experiences quietly. The ultimate goal of creating supportive evening routines is not to follow a perfect formula or to achieve a particular state of consciousness, but to express care for ourselves and respect for the natural processes of rest and renewal that sustain our health and well-being. When we approach our evening routines with this spirit of self-care and respect for natural rhythms, we create conditions that allow sleep to emerge naturally and peacefully. These routines become not just practical strategies for better sleep, but expressions of the Stoic values of wisdom, self-discipline, and alignment with nature. They represent our commitment to living thoughtfully and intentionally, creating the conditions that support our highest potentials for health, happiness, and service to others. This commitment to living thoughtfully and intentionally reveals itself most clearly in what may be one of the most radical acts we can undertake in our hyper-connected age: the conscious decision to step away from the digital world during the sacred hours before sleep. The Stoics, while they lived long before our current technological age, understood deeply the principle that what we consume mentally has just as profound an effect on our well-being as what we consume physically. They would have recognized immediately that the constant stream of information, images, and stimulation available through our devices creates a form of mental indigestion that can profoundly disrupt the natural processes of rest and renewal. The challenge we face with digital technology is not simply one of time management or willpower, but of understanding how our devices interact with the fundamental architecture of human consciousness and physiology. Our brains evolved over millions of years to be alert to novel information, potential threats, and social dynamics within small communities. The sudden appearance of a technology that can deliver unlimited novel information, simulated threats through news and entertainment, and the social dynamics of thousands or millions of people represents an unprecedented challenge to our nervous systems. When we expose ourselves to digital stimulation in the hours before sleep, we are essentially asking our ancient biological systems to process and respond to levels of information and activation that they were never designed to handle. The result is often a state of subtle but persistent arousal that can persist long after we have turned off our devices and attempted to rest. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the importance of guarding the mind from unnecessary influences, particularly those that promote anxiety, anger, or desire. He understood that we are constantly being shaped by what we allow into our consciousness, and that wisdom lies in being selective about these influences. In our current context, this selectiveness must extend to our digital consumption, especially during the vulnerable transition period before sleep. The blue light emitted by screens presents one level of challenge, interfering with melatonin production and sending signals to our brains that it is still daytime. But perhaps even more significant is the content we consume through our devices. Social media platforms are specifically designed to capture and hold our attention through techniques that trigger emotional responses: envy, outrage, fear, desire, social comparison. These emotional responses create neurochemical changes in our bodies that are incompatible with the calm, settled state necessary for natural sleep. News media, while serving the important function of keeping us informed about our world, often focuses on conflict, crisis, and catastrophe because these stories capture attention more effectively than stories about stability and progress. Consuming a steady diet of such content, especially in the evening hours, can create a persistent sense of threat and urgency that keeps the nervous system in a state of vigilance. Entertainment media presents its own challenges for evening consumption. Movies, television shows, and online videos are often designed to be engaging and exciting, which means they tend to activate rather than calm our nervous systems. Even content that we enjoy and find relaxing may still provide more sensory and cognitive stimulation than is ideal for someone trying to transition into sleep. The practice of digital disconnection before sleep is not about rejecting technology or returning to some idealized pre-digital past. It is about using technology consciously and skillfully, recognizing that like any powerful tool, it can serve us well when used appropriately or create problems when used without wisdom. Seneca wrote about the importance of what he called intervals, deliberate periods of withdrawal from the demands and stimulations of active life in order to rest, reflect, and renew our energy and perspective. In our current context, these intervals must include periods of withdrawal from digital stimulation, times when we allow our minds to settle and our nervous systems to recalibrate. Creating effective digital boundaries for sleep might begin with establishing a specific time each evening when all screens are turned off or put away. This boundary might be 1 hour before bedtime, or 2 hours, or whatever period feels appropriate for your particular circumstances and sensitivity levels. The key is to choose a boundary that feels both meaningful and sustainable, and then to honor it consistently. The space created by digital disconnection can initially feel uncomfortable, especially if we have become accustomed to using devices to manage boredom, anxiety, or loneliness. Without the constant availability of distraction and stimulation, we may become more aware of underlying emotional states or concerns that we have been unconsciously avoiding. The Stoics would see this increased self-awareness not as a problem to be solved, but as an opportunity for growth and understanding. This discomfort is temporary and tends to diminish as we develop other ways of managing the evening hours. We might rediscover the pleasure of reading physical books, which provide mental engagement without the activating effects of screen light and digital interactivity. We might explore creative activities like drawing, writing, or playing musical instruments, which can be both engaging and calming. The practice of digital disconnection also creates opportunities for deeper connection with the people we share our lives with. Without the distraction of individual devices, families and couples can engage in conversation, share experiences, and simply enjoy each other's presence in ways that support intimacy and belonging. Sometimes the most profound benefit of digital disconnection is simply the experience of boredom itself, the spacious, unstructured time that allows the mind to wander naturally, processing the day's experiences and making connections that might not occur during more structured activities. Our culture often treats boredom as a problem to be solved immediately, but the Stoics understood that periods of mental quiet and apparent inactivity are essential for psychological health and creative insight. The practice of digital disconnection can also help us recognize how much of our device usage is habitual rather than intentional. We may discover that we reach for our phones dozens of times each evening without any specific purpose, simply because the behavior has become automatic. This awareness can be the beginning of developing more conscious relationships with our technology. Creating physical distance from devices can be as important as creating temporal distance. Leaving phones in another room, using analog alarm clocks instead of phone alarms, and keeping bedrooms free from screens can help reduce the unconscious pull we may feel toward digital engagement, even when we have made conscious decisions to disconnect. The Stoics understood that changing established patterns of behavior requires both clear intention and supportive structure. Simply deciding to use devices less in the evening may not be sufficient if we have not created alternative activities and sources of satisfaction to fill the time and meet the needs that our devices have been serving. This might mean preparing physical books to read, setting up spaces for quiet reflection or gentle movement, planning conversations or activities with family members, or creating simple routines that help us transition from the active engagement of day to the receptive rest of night. The goal of digital disconnection is not to achieve a perfectly quiet mind or to eliminate all mental activity before sleep. It is to create conditions that support the natural settling that can occur when we are not constantly feeding new information and stimulation into our consciousness. In this settling, we often discover that our minds have a natural capacity for calm, and our bodies have a natural inclination toward rest when these processes are not continuously interrupted. Perhaps most importantly, the practice of digital disconnection can help us reclaim a sense of agency and choice in our relationship with technology. Instead of feeling like passive recipients of whatever content happens to be served to us by algorithms and attention capture systems, we can become conscious curators of our own mental environment, choosing what influences we allow into our consciousness and when we allow them. This sense of agency extends beyond our relationship with technology to our relationship with sleep itself. When we create clear boundaries around digital stimulation, we are taking an active role in supporting our own rest and well-being. We are no longer hoping that sleep will somehow occur despite the presence of activating influences, but are instead creating optimal conditions for natural sleep to emerge. The Stoics would recognize this as an example of focusing our efforts on what is within our control, our choices about how we spend our evening hours, rather than trying to control outcomes that depend on factors beyond our influence. When we disconnect from digital stimulation as an act of self-care, rather than as a technique to guarantee immediate sleep, we embody the Stoic principle of taking wise action without attachment to specific results. This principle of taking wise action without attachment to specific results leads us naturally to one of the most overlooked yet fundamentally important aspects of creating conditions that support peaceful sleep: the conscious cultivation of an environment that speaks directly to our senses in the language of safety, comfort, and tranquility. The Stoics understood that while we cannot control many aspects of our experience, we do have significant influence over our immediate physical surroundings, and that exercising this influence wisely can have profound effects on both our mental state and our capacity for rest. The environment in which we attempt to sleep is not merely a neutral backdrop for the activity of rest, but an active participant in either supporting or hindering the complex neurological and physiological processes that must occur for natural sleep to emerge. Every element of our sleep environment, from the quality of light and darkness, to the sounds we hear, the temperature of the air, the comfort of our bedding, and even the visual aesthetics of the space, sends signals to our nervous system about whether it is safe to let down our guard and enter the vulnerable state of sleep. Marcus Aurelius, despite the demands and pressures of ruling an empire, paid careful attention to creating conditions in his personal environment that supported reflection, contemplation, and inner peace. He understood that our external circumstances both reflect and influence our internal states, and that wisdom lies in consciously shaping our environment to support our highest aspirations and deepest needs. The most fundamental environmental factor for sleep is the presence of genuine darkness. Our bodies evolved over millions of years in environments where darkness was complete after sunset, and our internal biological clocks still depend on this darkness to trigger the production of melatonin and other sleep-promoting hormones. Even small amounts of light from street lamps outside, digital clocks, charging devices, or light seeping under doors can interfere with these natural processes. Creating true darkness may require some creativity and investment, but the benefits extend far beyond improved sleep. When we sleep in complete darkness, we allow our bodies to produce optimal levels of growth hormone, which supports cellular repair and regeneration. We also support the natural rhythm of cortisol production, which should be lowest during the nighttime hours and highest in the morning to support natural waking. Some people find that blackout curtains or shades are sufficient to create adequate darkness, while others may benefit from eye masks that block light completely regardless of external conditions. The goal is not just to reduce light, but to create an environment that feels like a protected sanctuary, a cave-like space that invites the deepest levels of rest and recovery. The auditory environment is equally important for quality sleep. While some people can sleep through significant noise, most of us sleep more deeply and restfully when the acoustic environment is either genuinely quiet or filled with consistent, non-alerting sounds. Sudden noises, a car door slamming, a dog barking, a phone notification can interrupt sleep cycles even if they don't fully wake us, preventing us from reaching the deepest, most restorative stages of sleep. Seneca wrote about the importance of what he called philosophical quiet, not just the absence of external noise, but the presence of the kind of peace that allows for deep reflection and inner work. This same quality of quiet is essential for the inner work that occurs during sleep, when our brains consolidate memories, process emotions, and repair cellular damage from the day's activities. For those who live in noisy environments, creating effective acoustic boundaries for sleep may require some experimentation. Earplugs can be helpful for some people, though others find them uncomfortable or anxiety-provoking. White noise machines or fans can mask irregular environmental sounds with steady, predictable acoustic patterns that are less likely to interrupt sleep cycles. The temperature of our sleep environment plays a crucial role in supporting the natural physiological changes that occur during healthy sleep. As we prepare for rest, our core body temperature naturally drops, and this cooling is one of the signals that helps trigger sleepiness. If our environment is too warm, It can interfere with this natural temperature regulation and make it difficult to fall asleep or stay asleep. Most sleep researchers recommend keeping bedrooms relatively cool, somewhere between 65 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit for most people, though individual preferences may vary. The goal is to find the temperature that allows your body to cool naturally without becoming uncomfortably cold, supporting the deep relaxation that characterizes healthy sleep. The textural environment of sleep, the feeling of our sheets, pillows, and sleepwear against our skin, also influences our capacity for rest. Rough, scratchy, or uncomfortable fabrics can create subtle irritation that keeps the nervous system in a state of low-level alertness. Soft, smooth, breathable materials, on the other hand, can enhance the sensory pleasure of rest and help signal to our bodies that it is safe to relax completely. The Stoics understood that pleasure, when experienced mindfully and in moderation, can be a valuable part of a balanced life. The simple pleasure of comfortable bedding is not an indulgence, but a practical support for one of the most essential biological functions we perform. When we invest in our comfort during sleep, we invest in our capacity to meet life's challenges with energy, clarity, and resilience. Epictetus taught that we should be grateful for simple pleasures and comforts without becoming attached to them or dependent on them for our essential well-being. This balanced approach applies perfectly to creating optimal sleep environments. We can appreciate and enjoy the comfort of good bedding while maintaining the flexibility to sleep peacefully in less than ideal conditions when circumstances require it. The visual aesthetics of our sleep environment, while perhaps less directly physiological than factors like darkness and temperature, can still have meaningful effects on our psychological state and our ability to relax. Cluttered, chaotic, or aesthetically jarring environments can maintain subtle psychological activation, while clean, simple, beautiful spaces tend to promote calm and peace. This doesn't mean that sleep environments need to be expensive or elaborately decorated. The Stoics valued simplicity and functionality over luxury or display. A sleep environment that is clean, organized, and free from unnecessary visual distractions can be more conducive to rest than one filled with elaborate furnishings or decorative objects. The practice of preparing our sleep environment each evening can itself become a meaningful ritual that supports the transition from day to night. This might involve making the bed if it wasn't made during the day, clearing any clutter from nightstands or dressers, adjusting the temperature, drawing curtains or blinds, and perhaps lighting a candle or lamp that provides warm, dim light for the final preparations for sleep. These simple actions serve multiple purposes. They create the practical conditions that support good sleep, but they also provide a sense of completion and closure for the day's activities. They represent an act of care for ourselves and respect for the importance of rest in our lives. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of approaching even mundane tasks with attention and intention, seeing them as opportunities to practice virtue and mindfulness rather than as meaningless chores to be completed as quickly as possible. Preparing our environment for sleep can be approached with this same spirit of mindful attention. Some people find that incorporating elements of natural beauty into their sleep environment, a plant, a small arrangement of flowers, a piece of wood or stone, helps create a sense of connection to the natural world and its cycles of growth and rest. These elements need not be elaborate or expensive, but they can serve as gentle reminders that sleep is not just a personal necessity, but a participation in the natural rhythms that govern all life. The scent environment of sleep is another factor that can influence our capacity for rest. Strong artificial fragrances can be alerting and potentially irritating, while natural scents like lavender have been shown to have mild sedative effects that can support relaxation. Some people enjoy using essential oils or naturally scented products as part of their evening routine, while others prefer to keep their sleep environment completely scent-free. The key principle is to create an environment that feels personally nurturing and supportive, rather than following any external standard of what a bedroom should look like or contain. Each person's needs and preferences are different, and what matters most is creating a space that genuinely supports your own rest and well-being. The Stoics understood that we have limited control over many aspects of our external circumstances, but that we can almost always exercise some influence over our immediate personal environment. Even in challenging living situations, shared spaces, noisy neighborhoods, extreme climates, there are usually some modifications we can make that support better sleep. This might be as simple as using a comfortable pillow and soft sheets, even in less than ideal surroundings, or as complex as soundproofing a room or installing blackout curtains. The important thing is to recognize that creating supportive sleep environments is not a luxury, but an investment in our capacity to live with energy, wisdom, and resilience. When we sleep well, we are better able to meet the challenges of life with equanimity and grace. When we create environments that support deep rest, we create the foundation for waking with the kind of clarity and strength that allows us to serve others and contribute meaningfully to the world around us.